In all my years, I've never seen a guy like you who works so hard but has nothing to show for it. Eiichiro Oda has a pretty unique mangaka journey. It's a story about a stubborn, overconfident rookie learning to accept just how small his world truly was, while developing the skills needed to become a full-fledged mangaka. I see a lot of aspects of his struggle reflected in his characters. Ambitious and tenacious, unwavering loyalty and persistence, kind of dumb and silly. We'll take a look at the events that led up to One Piece and try to analyze parts of Oda's character based on what we know. Let's dive in. Oda was exposed to manga and other forms of visual art super early, which was a great way to spark lifelong interest in the field. I decided to become a manga artist when I was 4 years old. The instant I learned that such a job existed in the world, I thought, I don't have to work when I grow up. Funny statement knowing how much Oda works these days. This needs some elaboration. When I was in kindergarten, I really liked the work of Fujiko, but when I heard that all they had to do to make a living was draw pictures, I was so jealous. Back then, that meant exactly the same thing as not working at all. But what kid thinks drawing a picture means work? Working means putting on a suit and heading to the office, like my dad. One of the earliest inspirations that set Oda on his track was a manga called Kaibutsu-kun, aka The Monster Kid. It was about this kid and his monster friends fighting other monsters. He would frequently copy the series from his favorite works, which was a big contributor to how he developed his skills. As Oda stated, in the series there was this one panel that for no particular reason I really liked, and of all things it was a scene of a gorilla having a battle with a crocodile. The main character, Kaibutsu-kun, wasn't even in it, but I remember copying that one scene over and over again. There was clearly something about it that got me all fired up when I saw it. See, for boys, there's something special about seeing two powerful things fighting each other. The point is, it's the kind of thing that gets your veins pumping. I bet you can see where he's coming from. It's natural for an anime fan to savor those shows with intense battles and dynamic action sequences. It fuels a kid's need for physicality and excitement. Maybe they even provided you with a heroic role model. This is one of those series for Oda, the ones that inspire a sense of courage and self-confidence. His pirate fascination, on the other hand, comes from his favorite TV show at the time, Vicky the Viking, a European co-produced anime. As Oda explained, ever since I was little, I liked pirates. As a child, I really liked an anime series called Vicky the Little Viking. It was about a little kid who admires Vikings and his dream is to become one of them when he grows up. As I did research on pirates for One Piece, I realized that Vikings are a type of pirate. I feel that it's awesome to have friends on your team, just like the Vicky series. It may not be the best comparison, but I feel like that series spirit is carried on within my work. Shows like these help to stimulate a sense of imagination and adventure. Oda's father further encouraged this interest by introducing him to his own hobby, oil painting. Oda would paint together with his father frequently, and it became a hobby of his own. Some of Oda's work is even displayed in the schools he went to. All of this culminates into Oda's first award. When I was in early elementary school, I entered a prefectural art contest and won the top award, Special Selection. The theme of the contest was future dreams, so I drew myself riding on a gigantic stag beetle. Its eyes were shining as it flew through the city at night. It was totally awesome. When I stood on that stage, proudly receiving my award, I saw the other winning entries on the wall and I was stunned. Everyone else had drawn things like myself as an office worker, myself as a nurse, myself as a police officer. What was the point? Once I realized the theme, I felt embarrassed of my mistake, but all of the adults smiled and praised my drawing. Yeah, he was one of those bug collecting kids. This story does a good job of summarizing Oda's personality up to this point. He's creative and often goes against the grain, but he also started to grow overconfident. When I was a child, I was drawing for fun and received praise for a picture. I became overblown with confidence and declared that I was going to become a manga artist. At the time, I wanted to become the best at drawing pictures. I believe that the person who draws the best is the best manga artist. The concepts for his drawings feel very manga inspired too, which wasn't uncommon. Manga would frequently influence Oda's decision making. The Shonen Jump series Captain Tsubasa was his inspiration for joining his high school soccer club in 5th grade. Oda's taste started naturally moving towards Shonen Jump at this age. He's reading everything, Kochi Kami, Kinnikuman, and his favorite, Dragon Ball. How I first encountered Toriyama sensei's manga was the second episode of Dragon Ball, regardless of when it was. I fell in love at first sight. I thought, he's too good. At that time, I loved Disney, but I was thinking, this is even better than Disney stuff. Dragon Ball is a masterpiece. Oda credits this series as having the greatest influence on One Piece compared to any other work. The impact manga could have on an individual was becoming quite clear to him now. I guess, mild spoiler for a Dragon Ball death on the next quote. I sometimes didn't enjoy my junior high school life, but I felt happy when Jump would be released the next day. When Krillin died in Dragon Ball, the whole school was thrown into turmoil. I remember someone kept running and shouting in the school, "Krillin died," with Jump in his hand. Oda claims he'll never forget this memory. Friendship is a pretty big element of shonen manga for a reason. I think the most important feature of a manga is for it to be a tool to make friends. I know it's a pretty common topic, but in fact, I did make many friends when I was a child through it. It was the latter half of middle school where One Piece would start to take shape. This is where Oda started to double down on his goals. When I was in middle school, I decided that I would draw a pirate comic in Jump. I'll ignore the atrocities of historic facts and just draw a bunch of jolly pirates. Cause hey, it's summer. With that, the idea was born. Oda claims that it was around 8th grade that he started drawing seriously. He would draw every day for hours, and the amount of time he spent practicing would only increase from there. He's already developed impressive drawing skills at this point, but the first hint that it might not be as easy as he thinks was dropped around this time. When I was in middle school, I drew a photorealistic picture for a drawing competition that I was extremely satisfied with. I thought I would surely win the grand prize, but ended up receiving a secondary prize. The drawing that won the grand prize was an energetic piece that seemed like something a middle school kid would draw. A secondary prize still shows that Oda's got some skill, but given his overconfidence, this must have had him asking some questions. Why did something characteristic of the typical middle schooler beat his piece? If the winner's work screams energetic, what does your own work say? Everyone around him would always praise his work, so this was new. For Oda, frustration tends to be motivating more than anything, so this didn't kill his drive. He kept on practicing, even sacrificing time with his friends, even losing friends. He would quit soccer in his first year of high school to focus wholly on manga. Not even an experienced artist could make him waver. One day, I saw something a veteran artist had said that shocked me. He had written, "It's more fun drawing manga as a hobby. You shouldn't make it your job." That statement really ticked me off. He was a pro, having fun and making a good living, and he wanted other people not to do the same thing. What kind of advice is that? He was a master of the craft, and I was just a kid. Anyway, then I became a pro. As Oda approached the end of high school, he started developing his own way of drawing, but it didn't get the response he expected. When I was 17, I created my own style in order to become a manga artist. This also satisfied me very much, but the only reaction I received from others was that it's a different kind of picture. I learned that there was no such thing as an appropriate level of drawing skills, and from this realization, I lost sight of what I needed to do to become a manga artist. The style he was developing would go through a lot of changes, but it's clear that the constant stream of praise was slowly diminishing. In his final year of high school, he would take interest in the Tezuko Award, a contest targeting rookie manga artists offered by Shueisha, the company that publishes Weekly Shonen Jump. Oda's submission to this contest would be his first full-length manga after 4 months of work, a short comedy western called Wanted. Oda has been a fan of westerns for a while, his favorite being Young Guns. These were the inspiration for this one-shot. It's a fairly simple but enjoyable story following this outlaw as he evades capture and eventually gets haunted by one of his victims. You can see elements of One Piece's comedy style in this work. I don't know what the standards are for 17-year-old aspiring mangakas, but Oda's got some cool panel work here. Action scenes are a lot more chaotic with irregularly shaped panels and full backgrounds. Calmer scenes are more rectangular panels with very plain backgrounds. Good prioritizing. The circumstances surrounding the development of Wanted made 2 things clear. 1, Oda draws fast. And 2, drawing took priority. Everything else matters considerably less. You see, Oda was balancing a part-time job in addition to these other commitments at the time. It was at a restaurant called Barati, not to be confused with Baratier. As mentioned in a Jump Plus article, he was bad at it. Oda would unintentionally break plates on the regular and even eat food on the job. One of the chefs at the restaurant, Tasaki-san, would scold him quite frequently. I couldn't find any comments on how Oda felt about actually working a real job, but it doesn't sound like he had a good time or took it seriously, but it probably provided some motivation for the contest, and some good inspiration for the Baratier arc. On top of that, he broke his nose in an accident in the most critical stretch of time for the competition. 3 days before the deadline, I had 7 blank pages for the manuscript. I was thinking 2 more days would be enough, but an accident hit me. It was a car collision, and it was 100% the other person's fault. He was actually excited riding in an ambulance for the first time and was hospitalized for an entire day. Also, 7 pages in 2 more days? Well, he did it in 1 after that. It's also worth noting that he submitted Wanted under a pseudonym, Suki Himizu Kikondo. He was proud of his work, but Oda was worried how his teachers and parents might react. He's been spending most of his time doing this instead of tending to his other responsibilities after all. Oda ended up placing second along with 3 other people out of a pool of roughly 480 entries. There was no winner, which is a common occurrence with this award and can happen if the judges deem nothing was worthy. Oda revealed his real name to the world in his first ever interview published by this media company after getting his Tezuka Award achievement. In the article itself, he highlights how close he was to not finishing and how he's now developed a need to be constantly drawing. Placing this high for this award was huge. It guaranteed him a publication in Shonen Jump's monthly offshoot, gave him acknowledgement from Jump, and maybe the most impactful in the long term, access to an editor. He would soon meet Kaoru Kushima, perhaps the most impactful editor Oda has had in regards to his own personal development. More on this later. Wanted would become Oda's first published work. He'd actually go on to become a committee member for the Tezuka Awards in the future too. He now has a published manga and some reputation. Where does he go from here? College. He started the architecture program at Kyushu Tokai University, obviously still spending most of his time drawing. He used that spot in Shonen Jump's monthly offshoot he was awarded to publish God's Gift for the Future in October 1993. This one had a fun concept. It's about God trying to correct the pickpocketer's habits by killing him, then lecturing him. But he messes up and antics ensue involving a book where whatever future events get written into it become true. While not being far off from when he made Wanted, I think God's Gift demonstrates an all-around improvement. A big takeaway for Oda personally, drawing powerful scenes has now become one of the themes in my manga. His next endeavor would be the Hop Step Awards that October. He entered Ikki Yako and placed first. This one's about a wandering monk, lacking the ability to fight monsters, suddenly being pressured into the task of taking one down. Oda's paid a lot more attention to his backgrounds on this one. We also get a taste of his ability to draw closer range fights. He reportedly didn't give much thought to themes or a message of some kind. All I had in mind was, fighting monk sounds good, and started drawing. And his key takeaway at the time, I love flashy scenes, but I also love scenery, so I think I'll treasure that as well from now on. The entire time he'd been writing these one-shots, he actually didn't disclose his accomplishments to his peers. Actually, I hid the fact that I drew manga from a lot of my friends. I don't know about now, but back then, writing amateur manga meant being made fun of. I did not want to be called an otaku, so I decided that until I became a professional, I'd secretly be a closet manga author. With these awards under his belt, Oda was ready to take the next step. Dreading his upcoming exams, Oda dropped out of university in early 1994. This was it. After a year of that, I got to thinking, this really is a waste of time, so I headed for Tokyo. Of course I hated studying, but more than just that, heading down that path as a college student gave me this sense of impending doom. Under the charge of his first editor Kushima, he took his next step towards becoming a mangaka. Kushima got Oda a series of roles as a mangaka assistant, but through the entirety of his assistant life, Oda would constantly be submitting work to his editor, hoping something would get approved. Pretty much everything was rejected. This guy really picks apart my stuff. He's got so many complaints about it. I came to Tokyo because I was so confident in my ability, and obviously, I wasn't going to take anything to Shonen Jump that I wasn't supremely confident in. It just never occurred to me that anyone would have any issues, any corrections for my work. I remember every time this would happen, I would be so mad. But the thing is, what he said was correct. At first, I always assumed my way was right, but later on, I would see how I was wrong. The denial was very strong. Oda thought Kushima was the problem, and even had other editors look at his work. They agreed with Kushima, so I had to be like, I'm sorry, you were right the first time. But I remember it just wasn't happening. I wasn't getting approved. I remember thinking, why won't they take my work? Oda wasn't putting on a front with the stubbornness and overconfidence. He genuinely believed in his competence. His knowledge of the industry was limited, and he had an inflated sense of self from how much recognition his past work had gotten. When I was 19, I received my first fan letter. Somebody I didn't even know complimented the work I made. I was very happy. Then, I remembered the essence of this art form, the ability to create something that people would enjoy. The world outside of Jump kept praising his work. The world inside Jump pointed out the flaws. The meetings between Oda and Kushima could get pretty heated, but the frustration and criticism provided the motivation Oda needed to keep working long hours and improve. That same stubbornness was also a source of strength. He would copy frames from Disney movies, which was a good idea. In The Little Mermaid, all the characters were drawn frame by frame. I drew and copied all the facial expressions that caught my attention. For practicing realistic pictures, Oda used movie magazines. I drew the faces of many of the movie stars in the magazine accurately. Not as caricatures, but as if they were photographs. He evidently took each piece of Kushima's criticism seriously, but the worst one in his opinion. None of your female characters are cute. This is the most shocking piece of advice I've ever received from my editor. I couldn't sleep and spent the entire night drawing female characters. Oda would eventually start to understand the weak points of his work through the help of his assistant jobs. He first assisted Shinobu Kaitani on Midoriyama Police Gang. This manga was already close to ending, so the position only lasted a month, but that didn't keep him from being occupied the entire time and learning lots. He found the whole process fascinating. The thing that shocked me the most was the beauty of the final draft. The original molds are remarkably beautiful. 10 times more beautiful than I imagined. My own work wasn't even worthy of comparison. Unfortunately, this experience might have reinforced a misconception Oda had. At the time, I just thought that people who drew great pictures became manga authors, because everyone I knew of drew pictures really well. But with the next position, Oda would start to make significant improvements. He then spent around 18 months under Masaya Tokuhiro, working on 2 sequential series, the final bit of Jungle King, followed by Kappa Man. Like in the past, outside of drawing, Oda didn't take things very seriously. I will admit in my younger years, depending on your point of view, I was either extremely honest or extremely rude, and I would say stuff like, "This sucks," "This is boring," "This is too hard." Naturally, this affected how he'd behave in the corporate world. His age probably helped let a lot of things slide, though he felt like much of what he was doing often got overlooked. Everyone would treat him nicely and be surprised at how young he was. They'd even make compromises for him. They moved their break time so Oda could watch a TV show he was regularly tuning into. They even listened to that hip FM music he was into once in a while, even though Tokuhiro would always play AM. In a conversation between Tokuhiro and Oda from a One Piece art book, Oda revealed that there was one specific panel he drew back then that's credited as being what made One Piece what it is today. Oda was really happy to get the opportunity to draw this panel because it showed how much Tokuhiro trusted him. He botched it. This is the only quote I had to machine translate, so just be aware. Oda says in the interview, "When I handed him the finished drawing, he said, 'Are you satisfied with that?' In the end, I accepted it as is, but I was horrified when I saw it later in Jump. The faces of all the people looked the same." Oda goes on to explain how poorly done the outlining and facial features were, and that he regrets that drawing. "From that day on, I changed a lot. After drawing various outlines, I practiced making completely different faces. I believe that the reason One Piece exists today is because of this one panel." Yep, just like when I watch back one of my old videos and I can only see flaws and cringe. You know what I'm talking about. If you were to sum up this experience under Tokuhiro, you could say that Oda learned how important it was to pay close attention and avoid cutting corners. He greatly improved his ability to draw backgrounds, crowds, and clothing details. Not cutting corners can actually make the process more fun. I got a lot of the fundamentals beaten into me. While this is going on, Oda finally managed to get one of his drafts approved by Kushima. His one-shot Monsters was published in the 1994 Shonen Jump Autumn Special. This was a huge turning point for Oda. He was starting to recognize the faults in his work. When I read my own manga that was published in a magazine, the same way as reading a professional manga, I realized the meaning of Mr. Kushima's words, although it was frustrating. Monsters is about a samurai defending a village from a dragon, and probably shows the biggest jump in improvement between one-shots. It has a One Piece-like vibe to it with a lot of its story beats. Also, side note, if we look at all of Oda's published one-shots so far, you can see the beginnings of a certain swordsman character from One Piece. In some weird shonen mentor level move, Kushima was also to blame for what was happening to Oda. He basically planned out a training arc for him, but obviously had to make it more difficult than usual on purpose. I knew right from the start Oda was different. I made sure that there's an acceptable line for rookie mangaka. When Oda got to that point, I intentionally rejected his stuff. In other words, I raised the bar for him. So Oda is the protagonist of our world? Why did Kushima do this? Because he believed that the better an artist was at the beginning, the bigger their chances were of getting their first series cancelled in 10 weeks. He says it's due to their overconfidence and reluctance to listen to advice. Kushima knew Oda's type, and I guess he knew how to train his type too. Because Oda would later say, "I honestly couldn't understand why I was failing until I failed, but because of that, I felt I had a lot of the fundamentals built up. I had all these experiences to draw from before my serialized story. That was thanks to Kushima-san, even if it was incredibly frustrating." If you haven't picked up on it yet, the main point of improvement Kushima was trying to emphasize was character development and story. Oda thought one-shots were like movies, where you don't need every character to stand out. You just need the story to be good. Kushima would try and work on this issue by having Oda draw tons of one-shots. He wanted him to keep coming up with characters, having lots of ideas to later call upon. For the assistant roles, Kushima mainly wanted Oda to get familiar with how the weekly serialization process worked. He purposely sent him to someone who drew comedy and someone who drew drama, knowing this is what Oda was interested in doing. I would read these one-shots from other new artists and be like, What? Mine is so much better. How can this be? At the time, all I could think of was, why won't they accept it? But I could tell there was love behind those answers, so I couldn't just completely hate you. After Kappa Man ended, Oda's final assistant role would be under Nobuhiro Watsuki, working on Rurouni Kenshin. Unlike Tokuhiro, Watsuki was more laid back and easygoing in regards to assistant involvement. If they had ideas, he would listen and critically review them. One of Oda's ideas actually made it into the work. He came up with the idea for Honjo Kamatari. He generally just really enjoyed working here and made a lot of connections with the other team members. Don't know if you can call friends like us manga buddies or manga rivals, but that was the place where we all met. It was a fantastic place to be. From when we were all assistants, we all wanted to cultivate ourselves with this kind of let's all become serial authors attitude. But with the good came a lot of bad. Outside of the assistant work, Oda was getting increasingly distressed by continuing rejections after Monster was published. What made the situation different this time was that he was starting to listen and incorporate Kushima's advice, but he was still having trouble. He recognized how big the wall in front of him truly was now. Oda hit many lows where he'd temporarily lose the will to move. There was even a moment where he considered giving up on his dream. It was only once, but I thought to myself, well, there's still time for me to make it as a salaryman. But I was saved by the words of my editor at the time. The two of us were always fighting, but one day he said to me, "In all my years, I've never seen a guy like you who works so hard but has nothing to show for it." That brought on the tears. Just those few words put me at ease, and I thought about going for it with everything again. Claiming this to be his last resort, Oda eventually decided that he was going to go back and develop his pirate-themed manga idea. He put together a draft for a one-shot called Romance Dawn, which finally managed to impress Kushima. It was approved for further development. Oda sat on this idea for a reason. Writing a manga with a pirate motif was something I wanted to write since I was in middle school, but it wasn't something I just wanted to do as a one-shot. The scale of the project would be small, and there wouldn't be any way to do everything I'd want with it, so I made it a point that if I was gonna do it, I'd make it serialized. But as we've seen, serialization isn't an easy task. I was really just hanging by a thread and prepped myself thinking, if this doesn't work out, I'll just have to give it all up. And that's where Romance Dawn came from. So you could say I deliberately wrote it as the very beginning of this grand story, making it very clear that it was meant to be continued. Kind of like me telling everyone, look, I really want to write this story. Romance Dawn released in the 1996 Shonen Jump Summer Special and received general praise from its readers. Around the same time, Oda would get a new editor, Takanori Asada. Asada also believed in this work, which is kind of an understatement as you'll soon see. He managed to arrange a rare opportunity to fill a gap in Weekly Shonen Jump. Oda worked extremely hard, sacrificing sleep and food to get the second version of Romance Dawn done in 2 weeks. It once again got a lot of positive reader feedback. This is the version largely available to us today. Longer and a bit less like a prototype One Piece compared to version 1. Still feels very One Piece though. Despite the response Romance Dawn had got, Asada's superiors were skeptical of the concept and refused to serialize it. According to a TBS radio interview with the editor, One Piece was rejected by higher-ups 3 times before it was finally serialized. Asada took this seriously. He fought hard for One Piece, even having a dream where he physically beat them up. There was even a day where he bugged one of his bosses from 9 PM to 7 AM, questioning why they didn't understand the awesomeness of One Piece. This situation strangely reflects some themes in One Piece, surrounding the conflict between the old generation and the new generation. The senior staff were stuck in their ways, by which I mean they wanted more of what is known to work, and were unwilling to take a gamble on something new. One of the names that would come up was Kazuhiko Torishima, a well-known Dragon Ball editor. Torishima didn't think One Piece would be successful. He had supposedly made a comment in 2015 stating, "Manga that doesn't sell well is just trash for editors," which I guess gives you some perspective into his mindset. After several months of arguing between Asada and his superiors, One Piece was finally approved for serialization in Weekly Shonen Jump. Oda was actually still working as an assistant under Watsuki through all of this, though with reduced hours to focus on his own work. He formally resigned as an assistant on good terms and became a full-fledged mangaka. Oda was aware that Jump would typically give a new series about 10 installments to gauge response. He and Asada would start refining the story and put together the first 8 chapters of One Piece. The most notable change is probably the one involving Shanks. He originally wasn't supposed to lose an arm whatsoever. The idea comes from the editor's suggestion to spice up the first few chapters of the story, After the first chapter released in July, One Piece was proving to be quite promising, ranking higher in fan response than any of the other co-features. Oda and Asada were still quite anxious about it. Once the first volume of One Piece was released, they reportedly hid in a bookshop, wondering who the first customer would be. They shouted for joy when it was a kid around 12 to 15. Nice to see kids actually mimicked One Piece moves. It was always just jutsus and in the schoolyard during my elementary school days. Asada even spied on passengers reading Jump on trains to gauge reactions. From here on, Oda would develop an unwavering loyalty to One Piece. He's so committed to the success of his work that he sacrifices many other aspects of his life, and this is beyond the already high standard of sacrifices mangakas make in general. When editor Naoki Kawashima joined One Piece in 2016, Oda told him to die for One Piece. This is the level of dedication we're talking about. That first release in July 1997 was followed by many more years of ups and downs for Oda. Lots of pain and triumph. A healthy mix of meticulous planning, cool improvisations, and making impactful decisions on a whim. But that's a story for another time. More mangaka videos to come eventually.